In the deepest layers of human memory, buried beneath the dust of millennia, lies a story so profound it shaped the very concept of divinity. This is the tale of the Anunnaki, not as fringe theory imagines, but as the ancient Mesopotamians themselves recorded it. Their saga begins not with spaceships, but with the first attempts of humanity to understand the cosmos and their place within it. Who were these powerful beings that commanded the respect of kings and the worship of entire civilizations for over 3,000 years? What was the true nature of their relationship with the humans who built magnificent ziggurats in their honor? The answers lie waiting in the world's oldest writings, and the truth is more fascinating than any fiction. To understand them is to understand the very origins of our concepts of order, authority, and the divine. The story emerges from the Fertile Crescent, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where urban life first blossomed. Here, the Sumerians, with their revolutionary cuneiform script, began etching their understanding of reality onto damp clay tablets around 3,200 years before the Common Era. These weren't mere stories to them, they were theological documents explaining the structure of existence. At the center of this cosmic order stood the Anunnaki. The name itself is a clue to their nature, derived from Anunna, meaning the offspring or lineage of the supreme sky god. The suffix ki denotes the earth, creating a compound term that describes deities whose authority seamlessly spanned the celestial sphere and the earthly realm. They were the ultimate intermediaries, the divine bureaucracy that connected the unreachable heights of heaven with the tangible world of human experience. But how did this concept first take root? The earliest fragments of their story appear not in grand epics, but in humble administrative documents from the city of Ur. Temple inventories dating back to 3000 BC casually mention offerings dedicated to the Anunna who judge, and the greater Anunna of heaven and earth. This suggests that even at this dawn of recorded history, the idea of a collective divine assembly was already a firmly established pillar of Sumerian religious practice. It makes you wonder, what were these early rituals like? What were they trying to communicate to these powerful judges of heaven and earth? Further evidence comes from the famous Sumerian king list, a document compiled around 2100 BCE but believed to contain much older traditions. It begins with a declaration that would echo through millennia: kingship descended from heaven. This established the foundational principle that all earthly authority derived from a divine mandate. The list's antediluvian section, the part before the Great Flood, describes rulers with reigns of impossibly long periods. Al-Yalim of Ered ruled for 28,800 years, and Menluana of Bad Tibra governed for 43,200. These aren't literal historical figures, but symbolic representations. The astronomical numbers reflect a Sumerian understanding of cosmic time scales, vast eras entirely separate from human history. They suggest that in this primordial age, kingship operated under the direct supervision of the Anunnaki, in a time when the boundary between the divine and mortal worlds was far more permeable. To understand the physical context of this belief, we must look to Eridu, traditionally revered as the very first city. Archaeological excavations here have uncovered something extraordinary: 17 successive temple levels, one built upon the other, dating back to approximately 5000 BC. The earliest structures already show sophisticated architectural planning that would become the hallmark of Mesopotamian religious complexes. Their orientation toward cardinal directions and their elevated platform designs weren't arbitrary. They reflected cosmological principles that later texts would explicitly associate with Anunnaki divine architecture. These temples were not just places of worship, they were models of the cosmos, designed as meeting points between heaven and earth. Can you imagine the devotion required to rebuild a sacred site over and over for thousands of years, each time preserving its core spiritual function? The creation myths preserved at Eridu present the Anunnaki not as distant, disinterested observers, but as active, hands-on participants in the formation of the world. The Eridu Genesis, known from later Babylonian copies but reflecting much older Sumerian traditions, describes how the Anunnaki established the first cities and appointed the first kings to govern humanity. A pivotal passage states, "After the gods had created mankind, the Anunnaki, the great gods, held assembly and assigned the destinies." This single sentence reveals two crucial aspects of their nature: their collective decision-making process and their role as cosmic legislators. They didn't just create the world and step back. They actively managed it, holding assemblies to determine the fates of both gods and mortals. The city of Nippur, housing Mesopotamia's most important religious sanctuary, provides another layer of understanding. Inscriptions from this site describe how successive rulers restored Enlil's temple for the Anunnaki who decree fate. This is a critical detail. Even a supreme deity like Enlil, the powerful lord of the storm, operated within the broader framework of Anunnaki authority. He was, in a sense, their executive officer, carrying out the collective will of the divine assembly. This reveals a sophisticated theological concept, a form of divine democracy or oligarchy where even the most powerful individuals were subject to a higher, collective authority. What kind of debates took place in these divine councils? What conflicts of interest arose when deciding the fate of creation? Cuneiform sources from Nippur also preserve early versions of texts that would become Mesopotamian literary classics. The composition known as Enlil and Ninlil contains detailed descriptions of these divine councils, where the Anunnaki deliberated on matters affecting both the celestial and terrestrial realms. These assemblies took place in a special cosmic chamber, the Shekinah, where the gods gathered to determine destinies. The texts specify that 50 greater Anunnaki and 7 Anunnaki who decree fate participated in these deliberations. This establishes a numerical and hierarchical framework that would persist throughout Mesopotamian religious history. The number 7 held particular significance, reflecting the 7 visible planets and structuring both divine and human experience of time. But who were these 7 with the special power to decree fate? And what distinguished them from the 50 greater Anunnaki? To fully grasp their role, we must distinguish the Anunnaki from other divine categories in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The Igigi, for instance, whose name derives from a root meaning to see or to watch, represented a separate class of deities. They were associated with celestial observation and astronomical phenomena. While the Anunnaki governed the fundamental, unchanging principles of the cosmos, the Igigi served more specialized functions related to divination and the interpretation of heavenly signs. In the cosmic hierarchy, Sumerian texts consistently show the Igigi as subordinate to the Anunnaki in matters of ultimate authority. They were the celestial watchers, the middle management of the gods, while the Anunnaki were the board of directors. This distinction is crucial, for it would set the stage for a celestial rebellion that would ultimately lead to the creation of humanity. What did the Igigi see that compelled them to challenge the established order? The answer lies in a divine labor crisis that threatened to unravel the cosmos itself. The cosmic order established by the Anunnaki was not maintained without cost. A great labor was required to sustain the divine civilization, and this burden fell upon the Igigi, the watcher gods. For 40 long years, these lesser deities toiled endlessly. They excavated the canals that fed the land, built the magnificent temples that reached for the heavens, and performed the back-breaking agricultural work that provided sustenance for the entire pantheon. But weariness eventually turned to resentment, and resentment blossomed into open rebellion. The text describes a dramatic scene. The Igigi carried fire, they set their tools ablaze. The fire to the hoe flamed, the fire to the basket flamed. They surrounded Enlil's very residence in the holy city of Nippur, their burning tools held high like weapons. The cosmic infrastructure was grinding to a halt, and armed rebels stood at the door of the god responsible for maintaining order. The very foundations of reality trembled. This unprecedented crisis demanded an immediate solution. Enlil, finding his home besieged, summoned the divine assembly to the Shekinah, the cosmic chamber of fates. The gods were alarmed. This was a challenge to their authority unlike any they had faced. How do you address a legitimate grievance without surrendering your power? How do you maintain essential services when your workforce has mutinied? The assembly deliberated, weighing cosmic stability against the demands of their laborers. It was in this tense council that Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh waters, proposed a solution that would forever alter the cosmos. His character was distinct from the others. Where Enlil represented authority and order, Enki represented intellect and practical problem-solving. He suggested the creation of a new being, a creature specifically designed for labor. This new entity would bear the load of the gods, freeing the Ijiji from their burdensome duties while ensuring that the divine estates remained productive. But what substance could be used to create a being capable of such work? And what would give it the intelligence to understand divine commands, yet not the power to challenge its creators? The plan Enki devised was both brilliant and terrifying. It required a sacrifice, the blood of a god who possessed intelligence. A divine being named Wila was chosen, a god who has intelligence. His blood would provide the essential divine spark, the consciousness necessary for the new creature to function. This solemn sacrifice was carried out during the new moon, a time when cosmic forces aligned favorably for acts of creation. The mother goddess, Nintu, mixed the slain god's blood with clay, kneading the two substances together. The blood provided the soul, the intelligence. The clay provided the physical form, the earthly vessel. This mixture, this blend of the celestial and the terrestrial, became the basic substance of humanity. Can you imagine the solemnity of that moment? The death of one god to birth a new form of life, all to solve an administrative crisis in heaven? The creation process itself was a marvel of divine industry. 14 birth goddesses were assembled, each responsible for producing one male and one female human. They pinched off 14 pieces of the blood-kneaded clay, shaping them into human forms. The process took 10 months, mirroring the natural gestation period of mortals. The resulting humans possessed sufficient intelligence to understand and execute divine commands, yet they lacked the innate power to challenge the authority of their creators. They were the perfect solution, intelligent workers, divinely crafted for service. This act established a three-tiered cosmic hierarchy. The greater Anunnaki ruled at the top, the Ijiji were promoted to middle management and celestial watch, and humanity labored at the bottom, bearing the load of the gods. The system was efficient, but it was built on a foundation of divine rebellion and sacrifice. What did Enki see in this new creation that the other gods did not? Why did he secretly add extra divine essence to their nature, beyond what the assembly had authorized? This secret act by Enki carried profound theological implications. It established him as humanity's divine patron, a protector who would often operate in the gray areas of divine law. His decision to enhance human intelligence, even when he knew it might lead to future complications, demonstrated a complex understanding of the relationship between wisdom and suffering. It was an act of divine insubordination, a quiet rebellion that would have far-reaching consequences for both gods and mortals. This tension between collective divine authority and individual divine conscience became a recurring theme in Mesopotamian literature. Enki's actions raised a fundamental question. To what extent could a god follow his own ethics when they conflicted with the decrees of the assembly? This moral dilemma would soon be tested on a catastrophic scale. For 600 years, humanity multiplied and thrived. The earth became densely populated, and the sounds of human civilization grew into a constant clamor. The land bellowed like a bull, the texts say, and the gods grew restless at the noise. This disturbance was particularly troubling for Enlil, whose domain included terrestrial order. It wasn't just the volume that concerned him, it was humanity's increasing independence. Growing populations had developed their own social institutions, their own cultures, their own ways of life that operated with minimal reference to divine authority. The original purpose of humanity, to be docile laborers under direct divine supervision, was being forgotten. What does a creator do when his creation begins to exceed its programming? How does a king maintain control when his subjects no longer remember their place? Enlil's initial attempts to control the situation were measured. He did not seek humanity's immediate destruction, but its reduction. He first sent a plague, administered through Namtar, the god of pestilence. This was a targeted approach, designed to rebalance demographics without completely disrupting the essential agricultural production that even the gods relied upon. When this selective measure proved insufficient, Enlil authorized more comprehensive famines. He commanded Atad, the storm god, to withhold the seasonal rains. Other deities of fertility and abundance withdrew their support. The resulting food shortages forced human communities to compete for scarce resources, naturally reducing their numbers through starvation and conflict. These strategies achieved temporary success, but they failed to address the root problem: humanity's burgeoning cultural and numerical independence. And each time, Enki intervened. He provided alternative food sources, secret irrigation techniques, and survival strategies that allowed human communities to weather the divine punishment. His actions violated the assembly's collective decisions, creating mounting tension within the pantheon. How long could Enki defy the will of the other gods? What would happen when Enlil's patience finally ran out? The conflict between these two powerful deities, Enlil with his emphasis on order and authority, and Enki with his wisdom and compassion, reached its breaking point. Enlil saw Enki's interventions as insubordination that undermined cosmic stability. Enki believed that wisdom should temper the application of divine power. This fundamental disagreement about the nature of governance and justice would culminate in the most drastic decision ever made in the Shekinah. The divine assembly, after elaborate deliberations, reached a grim compromise. They would resolve the human problem once and for all. They would send a great flood, a deluge so overwhelming it would wipe humanity from the face of the earth. It would be a coordinated assault. Adad would unleash unprecedented rains from above, and Enki would be forced to release the subterranean waters from the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth. Even the most sophisticated human engineering projects would be powerless against such a dual-fronted attack. But could the gods truly commit such a complete act of eradication? And would Enki, the friend of humanity, simply stand by and let it happen? The assembly swore a binding oath of secrecy. No god was to warn humanity of the impending doom. This oath created the central dramatic tension of the narrative and presented Enki with his ultimate moral test. How could he save his beloved creation without directly violating his vow? His solution was a masterpiece of technical compliance. He did not speak to the wise man, Atrahasis, directly. Instead, he stood by the reed wall of Atrahasis's house and spoke to the wall itself. Reed wall, listen and pay attention. Dismantle your house, build a boat. Reject possessions and save living things. Through this indirect communication, Enki provided the essential instructions for survival. He specified the boat's dimensions, a perfect cube of 120 cubits in length, width, and height, a symbol of cosmic completeness. He detailed the materials, palm fiber, bitumen, and specific woods, all readily available in Mesopotamia and perfect for waterproofing. The construction had to be completed in just 7 days, mirroring the cosmic week. Atrahasis, understanding the divine message, mobilized his community, claiming the boat was for a trading expedition to avoid panic and questions. The project was underway, a secret ark built to preserve life against the collective will of the gods. But would it be enough? What would happen when the heavens themselves opened and the fountains of the great deep broke forth? The fate of all creation hung in the balance. The appointed time arrived under a sky heavy with ominous portents. Normal weather patterns ceased as if the world itself was holding its breath. Darkness fell during the day, and the ground trembled with the release of the subterranean waters. Then the flood began in earnest, a coordinated, cosmic assault. Adad storms unleashed a torrent of rain unlike any seen before, while the Anunnaki collectively opened the fountains of the great deep. The Epic of Gilgamesh would later recount that even the gods were terrified by the flood's ferocity, cowering in the highest heavens like frightened dogs. The waters rose, swallowing temples, cities, and fields, erasing millennia of human development in a matter of days. For 7 days and 7 nights, the deluge raged, a period corresponding to the cosmic week that structured all of existence. The world was returned to a primordial state of watery chaos. Inside the carefully constructed ark, Atrahasis and the preserved life forms rode out the cataclysm. The vessel, a perfect cube, became a microcosm of the ordered world, a tiny bubble of sanity adrift in an ocean of divine wrath. Meanwhile, a profound regret settled over the divine assembly. As the destruction reached its peak, the gods realized the consequences of their decision. They had eliminated the noise, but they had also destroyed their worshippers. The sweet savor of daily offerings, the prayers, the adoration, all were gone. The Gilgamesh account describes the goddess Ishtar crying out in distress, lamenting the destruction of her human children. The gods, who had grown dependent on human service, now faced a silent, empty world. Their solution had become their punishment. What is a god without a worshipper? What is a king without subjects? When the rains finally ceased and the waters began to recede, Atrahasis began his methodical testing of the new world. He released a dove. It flew off, circled, and returned to the ark, finding no place to rest. He released a swallow with the same result. Finally, he released a raven. The raven did not return. It had found carrion from the flood's victims, indicating that the waters had sufficiently dispersed and land was emerging. The ark came to rest on Mount Nizur, identified in the Zagros Mountains, a sacred highland that became the birthplace of renewed human civilization. The first act of the survivors was not to celebrate, but to worship. Atrahasis built an altar and offered a sacrifice. The smoke from this offering, described as a sweet savor, drifted up to the heavens. The gods, who had been starved of this sustenance, gathered around the sacrifice, like flies, drawn by their desperate need for the worship they had so carelessly destroyed. The discovery of human survival created the final crisis. Enlil's initial rage was volcanic. His plan had been subverted. He demanded to know who was responsible for this act of defiance. The other gods turned their eyes to Enki, the clever god of wisdom. Enki did not deny his actions. Instead, he stood before the divine assembly and presented a defense that was as practical as it was profound. He argued that the complete destruction of humanity was an irrational act. It had eliminated the very worship and service that sustained divine civilization, creating a far greater problem for the gods than any human noise ever could. His speech forced the assembly to confront the economic reality of their existence. They needed humanity. His argument was not based on compassion alone, but on the cold, hard logic of cosmic interdependency. Could the gods truly afford to be without their human laborers and worshippers? The assembly, faced with this undeniable logic, reached a new resolution. A covenant was established, a new set of rules for the relationship between gods and mortals. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but with natural limits imposed to prevent the overpopulation that had so troubled Enlil. The gods introduced increased infant mortality, diseases that targeted specific age groups, and social institutions like celibate priesthoods that would naturally curb population growth. These measures would maintain a manageable number of humans without requiring future catastrophic interventions. Furthermore, the gods agreed to new channels of communication. Instead of direct intervention, they would make their will known through established systems of divination, dreams, and prophetic inspiration. This new arrangement preserved divine authority while granting human societies a degree of autonomy to develop within divinely approved parameters. The Great Crisis was over, but the world had been forever changed. With this new covenant in place, the Anunnaki implemented a revolutionary system of governance. Rather than maintaining direct, hands-on oversight, they established permanent earthly residences within specific city-states, creating a patron deity system. This decentralized divine authority across the geographical landscape while maintaining the hierarchical structure of the celestial bureaucracy. Enlil selected Nippur, centrally located in the alluvial plain, as his primary earthly home. His temple complex, the Ekur, became the most sophisticated architectural achievement of early Mesopotamia. Its ziggurat rose in 7 distinct stages, a physical representation of the cosmic hierarchy, with each level serving specific ritual functions. Priests ascending these levels symbolically traversed the journey from the human realm to the divine. The infrastructure required to support this establishment was vast, employing thousands of workers, priests, craftsmen, musicians, and administrators, all dedicated to sustaining the elaborate ritual cycles that reinforced Enlil's authority. Meanwhile, Enki established his contrasting model of patronage at Eridu. His temple complex, the Abzu, emphasized wisdom and technical knowledge. It included extensive educational facilities where scribes learned cuneiform, mathematicians calculated astronomical cycles, and engineers studied hydraulic principles. Eridu became Mesopotamia's premier center for intellectual development, a university under divine patronage. The temple's workshops produced masterpieces of metalwork and craftsmanship, while its libraries preserved medical texts, mathematical procedures, and technical manuals. Enki's association with the fresh waters of the Abzu connected him directly to the irrigation systems that made Mesopotamian agriculture possible, demonstrating how his theological role translated into concrete, life-sustaining benefits for human society. Inanna's patronage of Uruk introduced a third model, one that thrived on dynamic tension. As the goddess of both love and war, her energy was potent and potentially destructive. Her temple, the Eanna, featured separate precincts dedicated to her contrasting aspects. Her worship was channeled through the most sophisticated expression of divine-human political integration, the sacred marriage ceremony. Each year, the reigning king of Uruk would symbolically become Dumuzi, Inanna's mythological consort, in a ritual known as the Hieros Gamos. This ceremonial union, prepared for over months of purification and rehearsal, transferred divine authority to the earthly ruler and secured the goddess's blessing for the city's prosperity and military success. The ceremony's success was believed to directly influence the coming agricultural yield and the city's political fortunes. What would happen to a city if its king failed to please the goddess? The consequences were understood to be dire. This intricate system of city patrons created a balanced, distributed network of divine power across Mesopotamia, a celestial bureaucracy mirrored in the earthly landscape of competing and cooperating city-states. The political ascendancy of Babylon during the second millennium BCE triggered a theological revolution that would reshape the entire Anunnaki pantheon. This was not a simple case of political propaganda, but a sophisticated theological project that required reimagining the cosmic hierarchy while preserving the authority of the established gods. At the center of this revolution was Marduk, once a relatively minor deity, now elevated to the position of supreme king of the gods. His genealogical credentials as the firstborn son of Enki provided the essential foundation for this claim. Babylonian theologians emphasized that he had inherited his father's profound wisdom, but had combined it with a martial prowess that Enki himself lacked. This made him uniquely qualified to confront a threat that the older generation of gods could not handle. The threat was Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the saltwater ocean, who represented the forces of chaos. The epic Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, describes how Tiamat, angered by the younger gods, raised an army of monsters and prepared to destroy the divine order itself. The established gods were terrified. Anu, the Sky Father, attempted to confront her but found his authority insufficient. The situation was desperate. In a pivotal assembly, the gods made a profound offer. They would grant permanent, supreme kingship to any deity capable of defeating the chaos monster and saving creation. It was Marduk, young and powerful, who stepped forward. But he was also shrewd. He agreed to the challenge on one condition: the assembly must bestow upon him the full and irrevocable authority to command all divine decrees. The gods, with no other option, agreed. This established a new precedent for divine authority. It was now based on demonstrated capability and a divine contract, not merely on seniority or traditional inheritance. Marduk's preparation for battle revealed a god who understood strategy and technology. He assembled a powerful bow, a net woven from the four winds, and a devastating weapon, the Malamu, a terrifying divine radiance. He mounted a chariot drawn by four terrifying storm creatures. Rather than engaging Tiamat in a brute force confrontation, he used his intellect. He inflated her body with the winds, making her bloated and vulnerable, then drove an arrow into her belly, splitting her in two. With her monstrous form defeated, he began the work of cosmic organization. He split her carcass like a giant shellfish. With one half he fashioned the heavens, and with the other he anchored the earth. He established the constellations, defined the calendar, and organized the rhythms of the moon and sun. Having created the physical universe, he then turned to its administration. What kind of government would he institute over this newly ordered cosmos? His solution was a masterstroke of political theology. He did not dismiss the older Anunnaki. Instead, he appointed them to specific administrative roles within his new regime. He assigned them their stations, ensuring they retained their dignity and functions but now within a centralized hierarchy with himself at its apex. To justify this unprecedented consolidation of power, the epic concludes with the recitation of his 50 names. Each name was not just a title, but a specific aspect of divine authority that he had absorbed from other gods. He was now the sum of all their powers, the one God who could effectively govern all the functions that previously required an entire pantheon. This theological innovation reflected the Babylonian preference for centralized, monarchical authority, providing a divine blueprint for their own imperial ambitions. How could any city-state resist Babylon's authority when its patron god was the literal king of the universe? This new theology required a new physical home. The Asagila temple complex in Babylon, with its towering ziggurat known as Anunnaki, became the center of the world. This massive structure, reaching nearly 100 meters high, was a staggering feat of engineering and a bold statement of Marduk's supremacy, visible from across the flat Mesopotamian plain. The processional way leading to the temple was lined with walls of brilliant blue glazed bricks, decorated with reliefs of dragons and bulls, symbols of Marduk and his father Enki. This created a breathtaking visual experience for participants in the city's great festivals, transforming the entire city into a stage for the drama of cosmic kingship. The most important of these festivals was the Akitu, or New Year celebration. This 11-day event was the ultimate expression of Babylonian political theology, a ritual that annually renewed the cosmos, divine kingship, and earthly royal authority. The festival's centerpiece was a ritual reenactment of Marduk's victory over Tiamat, performed by priests in elaborate costumes. But the most psychologically potent moment was the humiliation of the Babylonian king. In a solemn ceremony, the high priest would strip the king of his royal insignia, his scepter, crown, and ring. He would then slap the monarch across the face and drag him by the ears before the statue of Marduk. The king would then have to declare his innocence, proclaiming that he had not neglected the gods, sinned against the city, or abused his people. Only after this ritual humiliation, this symbolic destruction of the earthly ego, would the high priest restore the king's regalia. This powerful drama served a crucial purpose. It demonstrated that even the most powerful human ruler was utterly subordinate to divine authority. His power was not his own. It was on loan from Marduk, and it could be taken away at any moment. What would happen to a king who failed this test of humility? While Babylon rose to prominence, other powers adapted the Anunnaki tradition to suit their own identities. The Assyrians, to the north, forged a fierce empire, and their theology reflected their martial culture. They elevated their local city god, Ashur, to the position of national deity. But instead of replacing Marduk entirely, which would have caused religious conflict with the deeply respected Babylonian tradition, Assyrian theologians crafted a clever compromise. They positioned Ashur as the commander-in-chief of the divine assembly, the divine emperor who led the Anunnaki in battle. This preserved Marduk's role as cosmic king while asserting Ashur's military supremacy. Assyrian royal inscriptions consistently portrayed their military campaigns as holy wars fought on behalf of Ashur and the Anunnaki against foreign nations whose gods represented chaos and disorder. Conquest was not mere expansion, it was a divine mandate to impose cosmic order on a rebellious world. How far would this divine mandate to conquer extend? The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal took this theological synthesis to its zenith. He created the greatest library the ancient world had ever seen at his capital, Nineveh. His agents scoured Mesopotamia, gathering every significant cuneiform text they could find: epics, hymns, rituals, omens, and scientific works. This was not merely an act of collection, it was an act of canonization. Scribes in Nineveh produced standardized, authoritative copies of the great literary works, including the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh. By preserving and standardizing this literature, Ashurbanipal ensured that the story of the Anunnaki, now with Marduk and Ashur at its head, would be transmitted to future generations. The library at Nineveh became the ultimate repository of Mesopotamian culture, a fortress of clay tablets protecting a 3,000-year-old tradition. But even the greatest libraries are vulnerable. What force could possibly threaten this vast accumulation of ancient wisdom? The answer would come from an unexpected direction, as the world of the Anunnaki was about to collide with powerful new empires and revolutionary ideas that would challenge its very foundations. The world of the Anunnaki, so long confined to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, was about to be thrown open to forces its priests could never have imagined. The agent of this transformation was a young conqueror from the west, Alexander of Macedon. When he entered Babylon in 331 BCE, he did so with respect, participating in traditional coronation rituals and ordering the restoration of temples. This created an illusion of continuity, a sense that the ancient rhythms of divine service would continue undisturbed. But his death in that same city 8 years later marked the true end of an era. The political and cultural systems that had nurtured Anunnaki worship for 3 millennia were about to be dismantled, replaced by the sprawling, cosmopolitan machinery of the Hellenistic world. The Seleucid dynasty, which inherited this part of Alexander's empire, established Greek as the language of administration and philosophy. This introduced a fundamentally different way of thinking about the divine. Greek administrators, trained in rational inquiry, approached the Anunnaki not as objects of devotion, but as subjects for intellectual analysis. They saw the pantheon as a fascinating, if somewhat primitive, mythological system. To accommodate this new reality, a remarkable synthesis began. Babylonian priests, seeking to make their traditions comprehensible and respectable to their new rulers, embarked on a project of theological translation. The scholar priest Berossus wrote his Babylonica, a 3-volume work presenting Mesopotamian history and religion in Greek. He described the Anunnaki as divine beings who descended from heaven to teach humanity the arts of civilization, a narrative that resonated with Greek stories of culture heroes like Prometheus. This led to the systematic identification of Anunnaki with Greek gods. Marduk was equated with Zeus, the king of the gods. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, was seamlessly linked with Apollo, who shared domains of prophecy and intellectual pursuits. This was more than simple renaming. It was a complex theological negotiation that preserved the essence of the Mesopotamian deities while dressing them in Greek cultural clothing. In the multicultural city of Dura-Europos, temples housed statues and art that blended Babylonian and Greek styles, creating a new, hybrid sacred space. But this syncretism came at a cost. The intricate relationships between the Anunnaki, their specialized functions within the divine assembly, and their deep ties to specific Mesopotamian cities began to fade in the Greek imagination, simplified into a more familiar, Olympian family drama. As the public, citywide worship of the Anunnaki declined, their influence found new, more specialized channels. The most important of these was science. Babylonian astronomy, which had developed for over 1,000 years within the temple precincts to track divine movements and determine auspicious times for rituals, was now recognized for its sheer technical brilliance. Hellenistic rulers valued the Babylonian astronomers' ability to predict lunar eclipses and planetary motions with uncanny accuracy. Scholars like Kadinu, working in the 4th century BCE, developed sophisticated mathematical models that far surpassed contemporary Greek methods. His work on predicting lunar phenomena was a direct descendant of the celestial observation duties once performed for the gods. In this new era, the Anunnaki began their transformation from active governors of the cosmos into distant, powerful symbols associated with the planets themselves. Marduk became Jupiter, Ishtar became Venus, and Nabu became Mercury. Their stories were no longer the operating system of society, but the subject matter of a prestigious and useful science. This shift from public ritual to private application was profound. The great temple complexes, once the economic and administrative hearts of cities, saw their influence wane. In their place, a new market for personal spirituality emerged. The Anunnaki did not disappear, they were repurposed. In the Hellenistic magical papyri from Egypt, we find incantations that invoke Marduk or Enki not as cosmic kings, but as powerful spirits who could be compelled through the correct ritual to grant an individual love, success, or protection. This was a fundamental democratization of divine power. No longer did one need to be a king or a high priest to access the gods. Any literate person with the right spellbook could, in theory, command their attention. What did it mean for a god who once decreed the fates of nations to now be summoned to find someone a lost ring? This trend accelerated with the rise of horoscopic astrology. Building on their ancient traditions, Babylonian scholars now created personalized forecasts based on the precise position of the planets, the Anunnaki, at the moment of a person's birth. Your destiny was no longer solely determined by the collective decree of the gods in assembly. It was written in the stars at your nativity. This placed cosmic power directly in the hands of the individual, a concept that would captivate the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. The Anunnaki had become a personal, celestial influence on one's private life and character. Could your fate, dictated by Marduk's position in the sky, truly be altered? This question would fuel astrological speculation for centuries. Through these channels, Greek scholarship, astronomical science, and personal magic, the essence of the Anunnaki was preserved, even as the world that created them vanished. Their names and attributes were carried west by Greek astronomers who respected Babylonian data, by magicians who copied their incantations, and by philosophers who pondered their myths. The library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, though buried and forgotten for centuries, had served its purpose. The standardized versions of the epics, created by his scribes, became the basis for the copies that continued to be made in temples like those in Uruk and Babylon, right into the 1st century of the Common Era. The flame of cuneiform literacy, though flickering, was kept alive by a small, dedicated class of priests and scholars who saw themselves as the guardians of a sublime, ancient wisdom. They were the last living link to the world where the Anunnaki were the undisputed lords of heaven and earth. What would become of their knowledge when they too were gone? The answer lay in the sands that were already beginning to drift over the abandoned ziggurats and in the new universal religions that were rising to take their place. The final chapters of the Anunnaki's active worship were written not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, quiet fading. Cuneiform, the script that had given them voice for 3,000 years, became the specialized knowledge of a dwindling class of temple scribes. The latest known cuneiform tablet, an astronomical text, dates from 75 CE. By then, the world of Mesopotamia had been successively ruled by the Achaemenid Persians, the Hellenistic Greeks, and the Parthians. Each new empire brought its own gods and administrative languages: Aramaic, Greek, Parthian. The great temple estates, once the economic engines of the cities, saw their lands and revenues gradually shrink. The daily offerings of food and drink to the divine statues, the elaborate New Year festivals, the sacred marriages, these rituals became smaller, less frequent, and then ceased altogether. The statues of Marduk, Ishtar, and Nabu were eventually removed from their sanctuaries, their fate unknown. The gods who had once commanded the destinies of kings now found their temples silent and their altars cold. Yet, the disappearance of their cult did not mean the death of their legacy. Their stories and their wisdom survived through a remarkable process of translation and transmission. The key agents in this next phase were not Mesopotamian priests, but scholars from the diverse communities that now called the region home. Syriac-speaking Christians in cities like Edessa and Nisibis became crucial preservers of Mesopotamian science. They translated Greek astronomical texts, which were themselves heavily indebted to Babylonian data and methods, into Syriac. In doing so, they inadvertently preserved the planetary names and celestial knowledge that were the Anunnaki's final domain. The great Syriac scholar Severus Sebuct, writing in the 7th century, praised the computational system of the Babylonians, acknowledging the debt his own tradition owed to this ancient source of learning. In the southern marshlands of Iraq, a different community ensured a more direct, if transformed, continuity. The Mandeans, a Gnostic sect with roots in the late Hellenistic or Parthian period, preserved rituals and creation myths that bear the unmistakable imprint of their Mesopotamian environment. Their sacred text, the Ginza Rabbah, speaks of divine beings called Uthri who govern aspects of the cosmos, a clear echo of the Anunnaki's hierarchical function. Their elaborate baptismal rituals in flowing water recall Enki's domain of the freshwater Abzu. While their theology is distinctively Gnostic, focused on the soul's ascent from the material world. The cultural and ritual substrate is deeply Mesopotamian. They became, in a sense, the unconscious heirs to a tradition that had otherwise vanished from the land of its birth. The most consequential transmission, however, occurred with the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate and the founding of Baghdad in the 8th century. The Abbasids championed a massive translation movement, gathering scholars from across the known world to render the knowledge of the Greeks, Persians, and Indians into Arabic. In the great library known as the House of Wisdom, these translators encountered the surviving remnants of the Babylonian scientific tradition. The works of the Babylonian astronomer Kadinu, with his precise lunar theories, were studied and incorporated into new, more accurate astronomical tables. The Banu Musa brothers, brilliant scholars in their own right, sponsored translations that preserved Babylonian mathematical techniques. The name of Nabu, the god of wisdom, lived on in the Arabic name for the planet Mercury, Uterid, and in the sophisticated astronomical models used to predict its motion. This knowledge did not remain locked in Baghdad. It traveled west to Islamic Spain and north into Christian Europe. The Persian astronomer Al-Battani, whose work was profoundly influential in medieval Europe, used Babylonian parameters in his calculations. When his Zij, or astronomical handbook, was translated into Latin, it carried with it the ghost of the celestial omens once used to interpret the will of the Anunnaki. The great mathematical concept of the algebraic variable, so crucial to modern science, can trace part of its lineage back through Arabic treatises to the problem-solving techniques first developed in Mesopotamian temple accounting. The gods were gone, but the intellectual structures they had inspired became part of the foundation of global science. In the realm of myth and story, the Anunnaki found another path to immortality. The most famous of their narratives, the Great Flood, had already been incorporated into the Hebrew Bible during the Babylonian exile. From there, it entered the core of Christian and Islamic scripture, ensuring the story of a divine decision to punish humanity with a deluge would become one of the most widely known myths in the world, though its original cast of characters was replaced. The Watchers of the Book of Enoch, divine beings who descend to earth and impart forbidden knowledge, bear a striking resemblance to the rebellious Igigi and the wise Apkallu sages of Mesopotamian tradition. These stories, stripped of their original theological context, continued to captivate the human imagination, their power undimmed by time. The material remains of the Anunnaki's world slept under the earth for nearly 2 millennia. It was only in the 19th century, with the decipherment of cuneiform by scholars like George Friedrich Grotefend and Henry Rawlinson, that their voices were heard again. The discovery of Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh by Austin Henry Layard was a watershed moment, providing the world with the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and the Atrahasis myth in their full, complex glory. For the first time in over 2,000 years, humanity could read the stories of the Anunnaki in their own words, not as filtered through Greek or biblical sources. The meticulous archaeology of sites like Uar, Nippur, and Eridu gave physical form to the temples and cities mentioned in the texts. The towering ziggurats, the intricate cylinder seals depicting gods in their horned crowns, the thousands of administrative tablets detailing the economy of divine service, all these finds brought the world of the Anunnaki back from oblivion. Today, the legacy of the Anunnaki is multifaceted. In academic circles, they are understood as the central deities of the world's first urban civilizations, representing sophisticated theological concepts about cosmic order, political legitimacy, and human purpose. Their stories are analyzed as complex literary works and windows into the minds of our ancient ancestors. In popular culture, however, they have been resurrected in a very different form. Thanks to the work of authors like Zecharia Sitchin and television shows like Ancient Aliens, they have been reimagined as ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors who genetically engineered humanity. This modern myth, while rejected by scholars, speaks to an enduring human desire for a dramatic, interventionist origin story, a need that the original Mesopotamians would have understood perfectly. From the bustling temple complexes of ancient Sumer to the digital screens of the 21st century, the journey of the Anunnaki is a testament to the enduring power of story. They were created by humanity to explain a mysterious and often frightening world. They governed, judged, and nurtured the first cities. They were translated, syncretized, and forgotten, only to be rediscovered and reimagined. They began as the masters of cosmic order and ended as the protagonists of speculative fiction. Through it all, they have never truly left us. They live on in the 7-day week, in the constellations of our sky, in the foundational concepts of our mathematics, and in our timeless fascination with the questions they first posed. Who are we? Why are we here? And to what higher power or powers are we ultimately accountable? The story of the Anunnaki is, in the end, the beginning of our own. The final echoes of the Anunnaki did not fade with the last cuneiform inscription. Instead, their essence fragmented and seeped into the bedrock of human culture, influencing thought and belief in ways both subtle and profound. The great philosophical systems that emerged in the first millennium BC, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all developed in regions crisscrossed by Mesopotamian trade routes and imperial ambitions. While they presented a revolutionary monotheistic vision, their theological architecture often bore the imprint of the older system. The concept of a supreme God surrounded by a celestial court of angels or holy spirits, for instance, mirrors the assembly of the Anunnaki presided over by Anu or Marduk. The figure of Satan, the accuser who brings humanity's sins before God, finds a precursor in the function of certain Anunnaki who would report human misdeeds to the divine council. Even the very idea of a cosmic struggle between a force of order and a force of chaos, central to Zoroastrianism and its theological descendants, is prefigured in the epic battles of the Enuma Elish. This theological debt is perhaps most evident in the realm of law and morality. The principle that earthly rulers derive their authority from a divine mandate, a cornerstone of Mesopotamian kingship for 3,000 years, became a foundational concept for European and Islamic political theory. The notion of a covenant between the divine and humanity, with specific obligations and rewards, structures the relationship between God and Israel in the Hebrew Bible, just as the post-flood covenant established new rules between the Anunnaki and humanity. The laws of Hammurabi, with their eye for an eye justice, were explicitly granted by the sun god Shamash, establishing that human law was a reflection of a cosmic, divine order. This concept, that morality is not a human convention but is woven into the fabric of the universe by higher powers, is one of the most enduring legacies of the worldview that the Anunnaki embodied. As the modern era dawned, the rediscovery of Mesopotamia sparked more than just academic interest. It ignited the artistic imagination. The grandeur of Assyrian palaces with their colossal massive figures and the mystery of the cuneiform script itself became powerful symbols of the sublime and the ancient for romantic poets and painters. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its timeless themes of friendship, the quest for immortality, and the acceptance of mortality, resonated deeply with a modern world grappling with existential questions. It was hailed as a work that rivaled Homer, proving that the philosophical and literary heights of the ancient world were not the sole province of the Greeks. The story of the Anunnaki and their human creations provided a new, non-biblical, and deeply ancient perspective on the human condition, one that was both familiar and strangely alien. In the 20th and 21st centuries, this imaginative engagement has exploded. The Anunnaki have been reborn in the realm of fantasy and science fiction. They appear as characters in the novels of Neil Gaiman and Roger Zelazny, their names and attributes lending a sense of primordial weight to fictional worlds. In video games like the Final Fantasy series or the Civilization franchise, they are powerful entities or ancient civilizations, their mythological power harnessed for interactive storytelling. This modern repurposing is a testament to the raw, archetypal power of these figures. A god like Enki, the clever trickster who uses his wits to save humanity, is a character type that remains as compelling today as it was 4,000 years ago. The allure of these stories proves that the questions the Sumerians asked about power, creation, and our place in the cosmos are questions we are still asking today. Simultaneously, a small but dedicated modern spiritual movement has emerged, seeking not just to study the Anunnaki, but to worship them. Mesopotamian neo-paganism or Reconstructionism is a religion in the making, its practitioners attempting to piece together authentic rituals and beliefs from academic translations and archaeological reports. They face immense challenges: the fragmentary nature of the sources, the vast cultural gap between the modern individual and the ancient temple city, and the lack of an unbroken tradition. Yet, their efforts speak to a profound desire to connect directly with these most ancient of gods, to find meaning in the same stories that once guided the lives of the people who invented writing. For these modern devotees, the Anunnaki are not historical curiosities or literary characters. They are living deities whose worship can be revived. And so, the story of the Anunnaki completes its great cycle. They began in the oral traditions of pre-literate societies, took definitive form in the world's first written records, governed the cosmos for the world's first cities, and saw their worship decline and transform over 2 millennia of foreign rule. Their names were preserved by astronomers, magicians, and scholars, and their stories were carried forward in the sacred texts of new religions. They were buried by the sands of time, only to be spectacularly resurrected by archaeology and philology. Today, they live a triple life, as the subject of rigorous academic study, as the protagonists of popular myths and entertainment, and as the objects of devotion for a new generation of seekers. Their enduring presence across this incredible span of time and this diversity of interpretation is the ultimate proof of their significance. The Anunnaki were humanity's first great theological project, our first systematic attempt to name the forces that governed our world and to understand our relationship to them. In their divine assembly, we see the reflection of our own first parliaments. In their creation of humans to serve, we see our own anxieties about purpose and labor. In their decision to send the flood, we see our own fears of divine caprice and our longing for justice. They are a mirror held up to the dawn of civilization, and in that mirror, we can still see the outlines of our own faces. The cities of Mesopotamia are now ruins, their languages long dead, but the gods they created to explain their world continue to speak to us. They remind us that the search for order, meaning, and connection to something greater than ourselves is the most ancient and most human story of all. And that is a story that will never truly end. If you found this journey through the entire story of the Anunnaki fascinating, please show your support by giving this video a like and subscribing to the Sleepy Owl channel for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these ancient tales to light. Thank you for listening.